Hi, I'm Justin Barrett. I'm president of Blueprint 1543. I'm a psychological scientist and former university professor. If you like the content here, if you value it, please like and subscribe. On this episode, I want to talk about sports viewing, being a part of the crowd, a fan of the sports, because it is autumn. I was recently in one of my wife's line dance classes and asked the question, so what is it about autumn, about this season, that you look forward to, that you find kind of special? And a number of people mentioned watching sports, one sort or another, because this is the time of year where, at least in the United States, professional baseball is in its postseason, playoffs, World Series. Ice hockey has started up. Football, of course, lots of football going on. High school on Friday nights usually, college on Saturdays, pros on Sundays, Thursdays, Mondays, whenever they can squeeze it in. We're watching a lot of sports, and basketball season's even started up. So it's a special time of year for sports fans to watch sports. But why are we so drawn to watching sports? Well, I just want to focus on one reason why we are so drawn to sports, perhaps. That's drawn from the scientific or scholarly literature. And I want to compare that to something else that if you've been watching me for a while, you won't be too surprised to hear about it. One reason we may be drawn to sports competitions, and I acknowledge it's just one of the reasons, but particularly in-person sports watching or watching with a group of our friends, is that the experience can approximate what Emil Durkheim, the famous sociologist stroke anthropologist, called collective effervescence. He was trying to get at this idea of a shared emotional activation that bonds groups of people together around some common cause or some value. It helps them to become a cooperative community, a unity, instead of just a collection of individuals. It's that feeling we get about being part of something bigger than ourselves. It's this very emotional kind of feeling. And what it seems to generate those kinds of feelings is if we feel like we've got a common cause, we're feeling the same things at the same time, maybe a little bit of synchronized or coordinated activity. Research by folks like Emma Cohen, Dmitry Zigalatis, Harvey Whitehouse have shown that ritualized behaviors can elicit these kinds of bonding feelings, facilitated by bonding hormones in our brains and throughout our bodies that make us feel at one with other people. We become physiologically, psychologically, socially fused together with other people. Whitehouse has called this identity fusion, even with people that we don't really know. One of the interesting things about this happening in a sporting context, sports fandom kind of context, is it's kind of in an artificial space, this collective effervescence, an artificial space for where it historically usually would have occurred, because we're bonding with people who we don't even know, who we don't really have any good reason to bond with, who that bonding, that fusion of identity doesn't carry on into the rest of our lives if we don't even know who these people are, like if we go to a big stadium event. The only time we really need to cooperate with these folks is maybe getting out of the parking garage after the game in an orderly fashion, hopefully. But because sporting events can elicit these kinds of feelings of collective effervescence, being part of this big unity, it's not an accident that sports are commonly compared to, well, a religious cult. On some definitions of religion, sports really can be religions or some kind of worship. Those that are functional definitions of religion, they're called. So there's sort of two basic kinds of definitions of religion. This is a quick aside. One of those are the substantive kinds of definitions that focus on things like belief in supernatural agents. But another type is the functional. Religions are anything that pull people together around common sacred values and create this kind of community. And that maybe less familiar definition of religions was developed to include things like atheistic forms of Buddhism, where belief in supernatural agents isn't really important, if existent at all, but we would still want to call Buddhism a religion, maybe. So to capture some of those faiths that don't have a prominent place for gods, there's this more functional definition of religion, focused on things like these feelings of collective effervescence. Problem with those definitions, even though they remain very popular, it's kind of like if Buddhism is in, well, at least some forms of Buddhism count, then maybe so does baseball or football or basketball fandom. But that feels funny, unless you really are looking at the particulars. One of the things to observe about the sporting context, though, is that this sense of collective belonging and cooperation, this collective effervescence, almost a worship service feeling, it doesn't really have much meaning-making depth. And it's pretty obvious why. Because the focus of sporting events is not on becoming the best version of myself, living the best life possible, contributing to humanity, solving real problems in my community. It's focusing on some, usually young men, participating in an athletic competition upon which really nothing much rides. So a commitment to this common value doesn't really inspire a positive change in our character, an enduring desire to work with our neighbors to solve those real life challenges. There's no, what psychologists call a superordinate goal that we can truly participate in that will hold us together when the sports season is over, because we're not really contributing anything other than cheers and maybe face paint and weird clothes. Religious worship, at least traditionally, seems to operate on these same psychological dynamics and these same social dynamics, but because there is some deeper meaning making and some, at least traditionally, bonding with people in my own community, my own neighborhood, that then I'm going to go do life with, well, there's a real reason for that bonding. That collective effervescence does real work in that community to encourage cooperation, to maybe make us more pro-social, that is, more sharing and cooperative, trusting to each other, maybe more moral. At least it's been argued for a lot of these religious worship kinds of activities. The strange thing about sports viewing is it seems to push up many of the right psychological and social buttons, the same ones as we see in worship, in religious worship. And so for that reason, it's possible for this to become a substitute for properly aimed worship. And so maybe it's not too big of a stretch to think of the local college fandom as something like a religious cult, but maybe one that's not aimed in a very good direction. Now, before faith leaders just sort of get condemning about these sorts of things, it's easy for us to judge and say, well, that's not what you should be worshiping. You shouldn't be worshiping the local college team or even the high school team for that matter. But faith leaders should wonder, what is it about our collective worship activities that fails to trigger collective effervescence or motivate identity fusion in a way that watching sporting events can? Perhaps it's worth spending some time in the scientific study of these dynamics to find out why it is that sports are doing so much better than churches. Those are my thoughts for today. Let me know what you think. Like, subscribe, send me notes if you'd like me to follow up. I try to answer questions that I think I might have something intelligent to say something about, and sometimes your questions inspire new video content as well. Thanks for joining me. Look forward to seeing you next time virtually. Bye for now.